The most dangerous person in the room is usually the one nobody notices. The rain tapped softly against the windows of Blackwood Cafe as Evelyn Carter carried a porcelain cup across the crowded Manhattan dining room with the kind of steady grace people stopped seeing after the first few days. Every morning at exactly 7:10 a.m., Sebastian Hale entered through the same revolving door wearing another perfectly tailored suit, another silver watch worth more than most people's yearly rent, and the same expression that warned the world not to waste his time. The billionaire rarely looked at anyone directly, not the receptionist who greeted him, not the investors trailing behind him, not even the women who sometimes watched him from the corner tables with carefully rehearsed smiles. But somehow, every single morning, his coffee was already waiting before he sat down. 2 packets of raw sugar, 1 drop of cream, extra hot, no cinnamon. Evelyn never asked. She simply remembered. "Your coffee, Mr. Hale," she said softly, setting the cup down beside his tablet. Sebastian gave a distracted nod without lifting his eyes from the glowing financial charts on his screen. Outside, New York moved in shades of gray beneath the October storm. Taxi horns echoed through the avenue. Steam rose from subway grates. Men in dark coats hurried through puddles carrying briefcases full of problems worth millions. Inside the cafe, the air smelled like espresso beans, warm bread, and quiet ambition. Evelyn moved through the room like she belonged to none of it and understood all of it. She wore the same black uniform every day, sleeves neatly folded, blonde hair tied back low against her neck. No jewelry except a thin silver chain hidden beneath her collar. Most customers forgot her face the moment she walked away. Sebastian did too. At first, "The Tokyo acquisition is unstable," one investor muttered across the table that morning. "We signed today, we absorb the risk." Sebastian leaned back slightly, tapping his finger once against the ceramic cup. "Risk is where profit lies." His voice was calm, sharp, the kind that made grown men sit straighter. Evelyn paused only briefly while wiping the neighboring table. Just 1 second, long enough for her eyes to flick toward the contract resting beside his hand. Then she continued polishing the surface in silence. Sebastian never noticed the glance. But 10 minutes later, after the investors left for a conference call, Evelyn returned quietly to refill his coffee. "Page 14, she said. Sebastian finally looked up. Truly looked up. Her blue eyes stayed calm beneath the warm cafe lights. "Excuse me." Evelyn adjusted the coffee pot gently. "The decimal point in the infrastructure projection is off by 1 digit. Silence. Complete silence. Even the jazz music overhead suddenly felt distant. Sebastian stared at her for a moment, almost annoyed by the interruption. Then he opened the contract with visible impatience and flipped to page 14. His jaw tightened. 1 misplaced decimal point. Tiny, nearly invisible, and large enough to cost his company nearly $40 million within 18 months. The billionaire's eyes slowly lifted back toward the waitress standing beside him. But Evelyn had already stepped away toward another table carrying fresh croissants as if nothing had happened. No pride, no performance, no attempt to impress him. Sebastian watched her move across the cafe through the reflection of the rain-streaked windows. Calm, quiet, untouchable. For the first time in weeks, the billionaire forgot to drink his coffee before it turned cold. The following morning, Manhattan woke beneath a sky the color of cold steel. Rainwater still clung to the sidewalks outside Blackwood Cafe, reflecting yellow taxi lights and the endless movement of people chasing deadlines they would never remember a year later. Inside, the cafe glowed softly beneath hanging amber lamps while quiet piano music drifted through the air like smoke. Evelyn Carter arrived at 6:30 sharp, as she always did. She tied her apron neatly behind her waist, adjusted the sleeves of her black uniform, and began preparing the morning tables with practiced precision. Fresh flowers near the windows, sugar bowls aligned perfectly, espresso machines warming with a low mechanical hum. Nothing about her movements looked rushed. Nothing looked accidental. "You are here early," said Martha, the older cashier polishing glass cups near the register. Evelyn offered a faint smile. "The storm slowed the trains yesterday." Martha lowered her voice carefully. "That billionaire from yesterday asked about you." Evelyn's hands paused only briefly while arranging silverware. "People ask questions when they are surprised. And are they usually surprised by you?" Evelyn looked toward the rain outside the window. only when they mistake silence for weakness. At exactly 7:10 a.m., the revolving door turned. Sebastian Hale entered wearing a charcoal overcoat darkened slightly by the weather. His assistant Daniel followed behind him carrying 2 leather folders and speaking quickly about stock movement in Singapore. Sebastian barely seemed to hear him. His eyes moved once across the cafe before stopping near the counter where Evelyn stood preparing coffee cups. For the first time since becoming one of the most feared names on Wall Street, Sebastian realized he had no idea what color the waitress's eyes were until yesterday. Blue, he remembered suddenly. Cold when she was thinking, calm when everyone else panicked. "Your table is ready, Mr. Hale," Evelyn said softly. Sebastian studied her for a moment before sitting down. "Did you know that contract would fail?" She placed the coffee carefully beside him. "I knew the numbers were lying." Daniel frowned from across the table. "Excuse me." Evelyn straightened slightly. "Bad projections usually sound confident. Accurate ones sound careful." Sebastian leaned back slowly, watching her more closely than before. "You read financial reports often for a waitress?" "People say many things near coffee." Then she walked away again before either man could answer. Daniel waited until she disappeared toward the kitchen before whispering, "Should I run a background check?" Sebastian stared down at the steam rising from his untouched cup. Already did. And nothing unusual. But even as he said it, the answer irritated him. Nothing unusual did not explain a woman who could identify a $40 million error in less than 5 seconds while carrying a coffee pot. Nothing unusual did not explain the way she spoke about markets like someone who had once lived inside them. Across the cafe, Evelyn helped an elderly customer button his coat before quietly handing another guest the scarf they had almost forgotten. Small things. Invisible things. She never performed kindness loudly. That bothered Sebastian more than arrogance ever could. Because people usually wanted something from him. Access. Attention. Influence. Money. Evelyn Carter wanted nothing. Around 9:05, a nervous young analyst hurried into the cafe holding a stack of papers against his chest. "Mr. Hale, the board moved the meeting up," he said breathlessly. "They need to revise Tokyo numbers immediately." Sebastian took the documents with visible irritation. As the analyst rushed away again, one loose page slipped unnoticed onto the floor beside the table. Evelyn appeared moments later carrying fresh coffee. She bent down, picked up the paper gently, and her eyes scanned it for less than 2 seconds. Then she looked directly at Sebastian. "The transportation forecast is duplicated," she said quietly. "That should worry you more than the decimal point did." Sebastian's expression hardened. "How do you keep seeing these things?" Evelyn set the coffee down carefully. Her voice stayed calm, almost distant. "Because powerful men usually stop looking after they become important." Then she walked away while the billionaire sat completely still, staring at the numbers she had already memorized without trying. By Thursday morning, Sebastian Hale stopped pretending he was coming to Blackwood Cafe for the coffee. The realization irritated him more than it should have. Men like Sebastian built billion-dollar empires by controlling habits, not developing unnecessary ones. Yet there he was again at exactly 7:10 a.m., stepping through the revolving door while Manhattan disappeared beneath another curtain of cold rain. The cafe felt warmer than usual that morning. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Fresh cinnamon rolls cooled behind the glass counter. Outside, pedestrians moved quickly beneath umbrellas while steam curled from sewer grates into the gray sky. Evelyn Carter stood near the espresso machine adjusting ceramic cups into perfect rows. She looked calm as always, untouchable as always. Sebastian removed his gloves slowly. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said without looking up. "Your coffee will be ready in 30 seconds. Daniel glanced sideways at his boss. "That is unsettling." Sebastian ignored him, though privately he agreed. Evelyn never wrote anything down, never asked questions twice. Somehow she remembered every detail people accidentally revealed around her. Their schedules, their habits, their moods. It was as if she collected information quietly while the rest of the world underestimated her on purpose. Sebastian sat near the window while rain traced silver lines across the glass. His phone buzzed nonstop with market alerts, board messages, and investor concerns about the Tokyo acquisition delay. He normally thrived under pressure. But today his attention drifted repeatedly toward the woman carrying coffee through the cafe with quiet precision. She moved differently from everyone else. Not rushed, not nervous, deliberate, like someone who had once lived inside rooms much larger than this one. "You are staring again," Daniel muttered under his breath. Sebastian took a slow sip of coffee. "I am observing." "That sounds more expensive." Sebastian almost smiled, but the expression faded quickly when another investor approached the table. Richard Coleman, mid-50s, expensive navy coat, aggressive handshake, the kind of man who measured intelligence by job titles and volume. "Sebastian," Richard said loudly, dropping into the seat across from him. "I heard your Tokyo numbers survived another disaster." "Barely." Richard laughed while loosening his tie. "Well, at least your waitress seems smarter than half your analysts." Evelyn approached calmly, carrying a fresh cup. Richard barely looked at her before speaking again. "Sweetheart, can you bring us another round? And maybe teach my accounting department while you are at it." Several nearby customers chuckled quietly. Evelyn did not react. She placed the coffee down gently beside him. "Cream on the side this time," she said softly. Richard frowned. "I did not ask for cream. You will in about 4 minutes." Then she walked away. Daniel blinked slowly. What does that even mean? Sebastian watched Evelyn disappear behind the counter without explanation. Exactly 4 minutes later, Richard answered a phone call from his wife. His expression tightened immediately. "What do you mean my blood pressure medication is at home?" He rubbed his forehead with visible frustration before reaching automatically for the small pitcher of cream beside his coffee. Daniel nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Richard froze halfway through pouring. "Did she?" Sebastian stared toward the counter where Evelyn quietly folded napkins without looking in their direction. "Interesting," he murmured. Richard lowered his voice. "Who exactly is she?" Sebastian gave the only honest answer he had. "I do not know." Across the cafe, a young waitress accidentally dropped a tray near the kitchen entrance. Plates shattered across the floor. The girl looked horrified. Customers turned immediately toward the noise. Martha sighed under her breath. But before anyone could complain, Evelyn calmly crossed the room, knelt beside the frightened waitress, and helped gather the broken pieces with careful hands. "Breathe," she whispered gently. "People forgive accidents faster than panic." The younger girl nodded shakily. No lecture. No embarrassment. Just quiet dignity. Sebastian watched the moment in silence. Most powerful people he knew controlled rooms by making others feel smaller. Evelyn somehow did the opposite, and that frightened him far more than arrogance ever could. By the beginning of the next week, Sebastian Hale had unconsciously started measuring his mornings by Evelyn Carter's silence. If she greeted him softly, the cafe felt calm. If she looked distracted, the room somehow carried tension before the first market opened. It made no logical sense, which was exactly why it unsettled him. Monday arrived colder than usual. Manhattan wind rattled the cafe windows while early snow threatened the rooftops across Fifth Avenue. The city looked washed in silver and smoke beneath the pale morning sky. Inside Blackwood Cafe, warmth wrapped around customers in quiet layers of jazz music, espresso steam, and the soft clinking of porcelain cups. Sebastian entered at exactly 7:10 a.m. again. This time, Evelyn looked up before he reached the table. "No sugar today," she said calmly while setting down the coffee. Sebastian frowned slightly. "I always take sugar. Not after the call you are about to receive." Daniel slowly lowered his tablet. "Okay, now that is getting creepy." Sebastian almost asked what she meant, but his phone vibrated sharply against the table before the words left his mouth. He answered with visible irritation. "Hale." Silence. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Daniel to notice. Sebastian leaned back slowly while listening to the voice on the other end. "How bad?" Another pause. "Freeze the expansion immediately." He ended the call without another word. Daniel stared at him carefully. "Singapore." Sebastian nodded once. "Regulatory issue. We just lost the overseas tax advantage." His eyes drifted toward the untouched sugar packets beside the coffee cup, then toward Evelyn standing quietly across the cafe helping an elderly woman remove her gloves. She had already known he would lose his appetite for sweetness before the phone even rang. Daniel spoke lower this time. "Who is she?" Sebastian answered honestly again. "I still do not know." But for the first time in years, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar pressing quietly beneath his composure. Curiosity mixed with caution. Because powerful men spent their entire lives learning how to predict people. Evelyn Carter was the first person in a decade he could not calculate. Around 8:30, the cafe filled with executives escaping the cold. Conversations about markets, mergers, and stock drops floated through the room like nervous static. Sebastian reviewed financial reports while absently watching Evelyn move between tables. She remembered every order without writing them down. Knew exactly when someone needed space and when they needed kindness. She never interrupted conversations, yet somehow understood all of them. Then the door opened. A tall man stepped inside wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snow. Late 40s. British accent. Expensive leather gloves. The moment his eyes landed on Evelyn, he stopped walking entirely. Real shock crossed his face. Not curiosity. Recognition. Evelyn looked up from the counter and froze for half a second. Just half. But Sebastian saw it. The man approached slowly. Evelyn. Her expression returned to calm almost instantly. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Daniel looked toward Sebastian immediately. She knows him? Sebastian said nothing. He was already watching too closely. The man laughed softly in disbelief. My God. He removed his gloves slowly while staring at her. I spent 2 years wondering where you disappeared to. Several nearby customers glanced over now. Evelyn kept arranging coffee cups carefully. People disappear every day in New York. Not people like you. Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. The room suddenly felt quieter. Mr. Whitmore lowered his voice. Do they know who you are? Evelyn finally looked at him directly. Calm. Unshaken. No. And I would appreciate keeping it that way. The man studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. Of course. But Sebastian had already noticed something important. For the first time since meeting her, Evelyn Carter looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the name she left behind still carried weight heavy enough to follow her across an ocean. Mr. Whitmore accepted his coffee quietly before leaving for a corner table. Daniel leaned closer immediately. You saw that, right? Sebastian continued staring toward Evelyn while snow drifted softly outside the cafe windows. Yes. What are you thinking? Sebastian's voice lowered almost to a whisper. I think the waitress is not the waitress. Snow fell over Manhattan the next morning in soft white layers that blurred the skyline into watercolor shades of silver and blue. Traffic moved slower. People walked faster. And inside Blackwood Cafe, warmth wrapped around the room like a secret the city had forgotten how to keep. Sebastian Hale arrived earlier than usual. 6:48. Even Daniel noticed. You are either becoming responsible, he muttered while removing his gloves, or deeply confused. Sebastian ignored him. His attention had already drifted toward the counter where Evelyn Carter stood alone preparing coffee beans beneath the amber lights. She looked different this morning. Not weaker, just quieter somehow. The encounter with Mr. Whitmore yesterday had left something behind in her expression. A shadow, small enough most people would miss it. Sebastian did not. Evelyn glanced toward the entrance as if she sensed him before hearing the door. You are early, she said softly. So are you. I work here, and I own 3 buildings where nobody arrives before 8. The corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. Then she returned to grinding espresso beans with calm precision. Sebastian removed his coat slowly while watching her hands. Steady. Controlled. Every movement exact. Who was the man yesterday? He asked finally. Evelyn reached for a ceramic cup without looking up. A customer. He seemed surprised to see you. People are often surprised when someone disappears and survives. Sebastian studied her carefully. What exactly did you disappear from? This time she paused. The cafe remained quiet except for the soft hiss of steaming milk and the distant sound of snowplows outside. Then Evelyn placed his coffee down in front of him with deliberate gentleness. From a life where everyone talked too loudly and listened too little. Before Sebastian could respond, the door opened again. 2 men in expensive winter coats entered while speaking quickly in low British accents. One of them stopped instantly when he noticed Evelyn behind the counter. No, the older man whispered under his breath. It cannot be. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Just once. Like someone preparing for impact. The younger man approached carefully. Miss Carter. Several nearby customers looked over now. Daniel slowly lowered his tablet again. This keeps happening, he murmured. Evelyn straightened calmly. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. The older man laughed softly in disbelief. You vanished from London without a single message. Half the financial district spent months trying to find you. Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. London. Financial district. The words settled heavily into the silence. Evelyn kept her voice composed. And yet the world continued turning. Barely, the younger man replied. After the Rothwell collapse, people called you the only analyst who saw it coming. Daniel looked immediately toward Sebastian. But the billionaire said nothing. He was too focused on Evelyn's face. Not pride, not satisfaction, only exhaustion. The older man lowered his voice respectfully. You warned them, did you not? Evelyn picked up a towel and calmly wiped the counter. Warnings only matter when powerful people are willing to hear them. Sebastian felt those words more than he expected, because suddenly every strange moment over the past week began rearranging itself inside his mind. The contracts, the forecasts, the patterns she noticed instantly. This woman had not accidentally become intelligent while serving coffee in Manhattan. She had once stood inside rooms where fortunes rose and collapsed overnight. Why leave? Sebastian asked quietly. The cafe grew still again. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows while morning light reflected across the polished tables. Evelyn finally looked at him directly. Her blue eyes held something colder than anger. Disappointment. Because eventually, she said softly, you realize some people would rather protect their ego than protect the truth. Then the younger British investor smiled faintly. You know, he said carefully toward Sebastian. 5 years ago in London, people used to call her the woman who could hear financial disasters before they happened. Evelyn immediately picked up another coffee cup. And now, she replied calmly, I serve cappuccinos. But Sebastian no longer believed that was the whole story. That night, Sebastian Hale could not stop thinking about the waitress who used to terrify investment firms in London. Snow drifted slowly outside the glass walls of his penthouse office while Manhattan glittered beneath him like a kingdom built from exhaustion and electricity. Usually the view calmed him. Tonight it felt distant, unimportant. He loosened his tie slightly while staring at the investigation file Daniel had quietly assembled across the conference table. Thin, incomplete, frustrating. This is all we found, Daniel admitted carefully. Evelyn Carter arrived in New York 4 years ago. No social media, no interviews, no financial records beyond basic employment history. Sebastian flipped through the pages again. That is impossible. Apparently she used to work under a different surname in London. And Daniel hesitated. Most of the records were sealed after the Rothwell collapse. Sebastian leaned back slowly. He knew the scandal. Everyone in global finance did. 5 years earlier, Rothwell Capital had collapsed overnight after executives ignored internal warnings about unstable overseas debt exposure. Billions vanished. Careers disappeared. Several major firms barely survived the aftermath. What was her role? Sebastian asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the snow-covered skyline before answering. Senior risk strategist. Silence settled heavily across the office. Sebastian lowered the file slowly. A waitress. The woman serving cappuccinos every morning had once advised billion-dollar institutions before he even acquired his second company. Daniel continued carefully. There is more. Sebastian looked up. 3 months before Rothwell collapsed, an anonymous analyst submitted a 72-page report predicting the exact chain reaction. Anonymous. Daniel nodded once. Nobody listened. The board called it fear-mongering. Sebastian already knew where this was going before the next sentence arrived. The writing style matches Evelyn Carter. Across the city, Evelyn walked home alone beneath falling snow with her coat wrapped tightly against the wind. Her apartment sat above a small bookstore on the Upper West Side where old radiators clicked through the night, and the hallway always smelled faintly like dust and coffee. Simple, quiet, safe. She unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside. Books lined the walls in careful rows. Financial journals mixed beside poetry collections and worn philosophy paperbacks. A small record player rested near the window beside a single lamp glowing softly against the dark. Nothing expensive, nothing unnecessary. Her phone buzzed once across the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Evelyn stared at it for a moment before answering. Hello. You should not have shown yourself today. The voice belonged to Adrian Whitmore from London. Calm. Concerned. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. I did not plan to. Sebastian Hale is already asking questions. Men like him always ask questions. Adrian lowered his voice. This one might actually understand the answers. Evelyn looked out the window where snow covered the city rooftops in silence. That would make him dangerous. Back downtown, Sebastian remained alone in the office long after midnight. The city lights reflected against the glass while he reread Evelyn's old report line by line. Every prediction had come true. Every warning ignored. One sentence near the end finally made him stop breathing for half a second. Powerful people do not fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because success convinces them they no longer need to listen. Sebastian stared at the words for a long time, then slowly looked toward his own reflection in the window. For years, people had feared him because he saw weaknesses before others did. But Evelyn Carter had done something far more unsettling. She had seen through people completely. The next morning, Blackwood Cafe felt quieter than usual. Snow still lined the sidewalks outside, while soft Frank Sinatra music drifted through the warm air. Evelyn prepared Sebastian's coffee before he arrived, as always. But this time, when the door opened at exactly 7:10 a.m., Sebastian walked directly to the counter instead of his table. Evelyn looked up calmly. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." Sebastian studied her carefully beneath the amber lights. "You predicted one of the largest financial collapses in Europe." Several nearby customers glanced over immediately. Martha nearly dropped a spoon behind the register. Evelyn remained perfectly still. "And yet," she said softly, "people still only remember the men who caused it." Sebastian stepped closer slowly. "Why did you never defend yourself?" The cafe grew silent around them. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly toward the steaming coffee cup between them. Then she answered with a sadness so quiet it almost disappeared beneath the music. "Because sometimes," she whispered, "surviving costs more than winning." For the first time in years, Sebastian Hale arrived at Blackwood Cafe without checking his phone before opening the door. Snow had stopped during the night, leaving Manhattan buried beneath a clean layer of white that softened even the harshest corners of the city. Morning sunlight reflected against glass towers and icy sidewalks while people hurried through the cold carrying coffee cups like survival tools. Inside the cafe, warmth greeted him instantly. The scent of espresso drifted through the air beside low piano music and the quiet rhythm of conversations that did not involve billion-dollar decisions. Evelyn Carter stood near the window, arranging fresh flowers into a narrow crystal vase. White lilies this morning. Simple. Elegant. Sebastian noticed she always chose flowers that matched the weather somehow. "Good morning," she said softly without turning around. "You are 7 minutes early again." Sebastian removed his coat slowly. "You keep noticing. You keep arriving." Daniel appeared behind him carrying 2 tablets and visible confusion. "I cannot decide if this place is becoming healthier for you or significantly stranger." Sebastian ignored the comment. His attention stayed fixed on Evelyn. Since discovering who she truly was, the entire world around her had shifted shape. Every small detail now carried weight. The precision of her memory, the way she observed people before speaking. Even her silence felt intentional rather than passive, like someone who had once learned the cost of saying too much. Evelyn placed the vase near the window carefully before walking toward the espresso machine. "The market opened nervous this morning," she said calmly. Sebastian frowned slightly. "You checked?" "I listened." Daniel blinked. "Most people listen to music before work." Evelyn handed Sebastian his coffee. "Most people are not responsible for thousands of employees." Sebastian studied her quietly. "You still think like an analyst." She looked down at the steam rising between them. "Some habits survive even after the career dies." Before he could answer, voices rose suddenly near the entrance. 2 younger men in expensive coats stepped inside speaking loudly about overnight stock movement. One of them looked barely 30. Confident smile. Gold watch. The kind of arrogance money learns early. "The Hale merger is unstable," the younger man muttered while removing his gloves. "If somebody leaked the transportation delays right now, investors would panic." Sebastian's expression darkened slightly. The men had not noticed him yet. Evelyn had. She calmly reached for a towel and continued wiping the counter without reacting. "Relax," the older man whispered. "Nobody here understands any of that." The younger man laughed under his breath. "Exactly." Sebastian slowly turned toward Evelyn, waiting for some sign of irritation. None came. She simply carried two menus toward the men with the same calm professionalism she showed everyone else. "Table by the window?" she asked softly. The younger investor barely looked at her. "Sure, sweetheart." Daniel stiffened immediately beside Sebastian, but Evelyn only nodded once and guided them toward their seats. No anger, no embarrassment, just composure. Sebastian watched her for a long moment before speaking quietly. "Does that not bother you anymore?" Evelyn looked genuinely confused. "What? People assuming you are less intelligent than they are." A faint smile touched her lips for the first time that morning. Sadder than amused. "Mr. Hale, some of the most educated men I ever met destroyed billion-dollar companies because they confused confidence with wisdom." She placed sugar packets neatly beside the investor's table. "Being underestimated is expensive for them. Not for me." Daniel slowly leaned back against the counter. "That might be the most terrifying thing I have ever heard said politely." Sebastian almost smiled. Almost. Then his phone buzzed sharply across the table. His expression tightened while reading the message. Daniel noticed immediately. "What happened?" Sebastian stared at the screen for a second too long. "Internal audit flagged unauthorized access inside our merger files." Silence. Cold and immediate. Daniel lowered his voice. "Leak?" Sebastian nodded once. Across the room, Evelyn glanced toward him briefly while pouring coffee for another customer. One glance, long enough to recognize the shift in his expression. Then she quietly walked toward his table carrying a fresh cup. "You should not trust whoever seems the calmest in your boardroom," she said softly. Sebastian looked up sharply. "What?" Evelyn placed the coffee down carefully beside him. "The people who panic usually still have a conscience." Then she walked away again while snowlight reflected across the cafe windows, and the billionaire realized, with growing unease, that Evelyn Carter had already seen a storm approaching before he even knew where to look. The leak reached the financial news before noon. By 1:15, every screen inside Hale International flashed the same headline in aggressive red letters. "Investors question stability of Tokyo merger." Employees moved through the 43rd floor with forced calm, while phones rang endlessly beneath cold white office lights. Assistants whispered near elevators. Executives avoided eye contact. Fear had a sound inside corporate buildings. Quiet. Fast. Controlled. Sebastian Hale stood inside the main conference room, staring at the city below him, while board members argued behind his back. "We need a public response immediately. If this reaches the European market, we lose confidence overseas." "Who leaked the files?" Sebastian said nothing. His reflection in the glass looked colder than usual, more tired. But beneath the exhaustion was something else now. Instinct. The same instinct Evelyn Carter seemed to trust more than numbers themselves. Daniel entered quickly carrying another folder. Internal audit traced the access point. The room fell silent instantly. Sebastian turned slowly. "Well," Daniel hesitated. The files were opened from inside executive leadership. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat too quickly. Another suddenly became very interested in his watch. Sebastian noticed everything. Evelyn's words echoed quietly inside his mind. "You should not trust whoever seems the calmest in your boardroom." Across Manhattan, Blackwood Cafe remained warm despite the storm growing outside. Snow melted slowly against the windows while customers escaped the cold with coffee and quiet conversation. Evelyn moved calmly between tables carrying plates of pastries and steaming cups, as if the entire city were not unraveling 2 miles away. Martha watched her carefully from behind the register. "You already know something is wrong, do you not?" Evelyn wiped the counter gently. "Something has been wrong for weeks." "Then why not tell him directly?" Evelyn paused briefly before answering. "Because powerful men rarely believe warnings until the consequences arrive dressed as disasters." Martha sighed softly. "That sounds exhausting." Evelyn looked toward the falling snow outside. "It is." At 3:20 that afternoon, the cafe door opened sharply against the wind. Sebastian entered alone this time. No assistant. No security. No overcoat buttoned perfectly into place. He looked like a man carrying too many conversations inside his head at once. Several customers recognized him immediately from the financial news alerts flashing across their phones. Evelyn simply reached for a clean cup before he even sat down. "No sugar today either," she said quietly. Sebastian sat across from the window while snow drifted behind him in soft white spirals. How did you know? Evelyn poured the coffee slowly. People who are betrayed usually stop craving sweet things. He stared at her carefully. You already knew there was a leak. I suspected. How? Evelyn placed the coffee cup gently onto the table. Because honest companies become nervous during pressure. Her eyes lifted toward him calmly. Yours became silent. Sebastian leaned back slowly. Do you have any idea how frustrating it is talking to you? A faint smile touched her face again. Small, brief, human. Probably less frustrating than being me. Silence settled softly between them while jazz music drifted overhead. For the first time since entering the cafe weeks ago, Sebastian looked around carefully instead of at his phone. Couples speaking quietly near the windows. An exhausted nurse warming her hands around tea. A little boy laughing over whipped cream while his mother smiled beside him. Ordinary moments. Real ones. Evelyn noticed him watching. You build a world where everybody performs confidence, she said softly. Eventually you forget how honesty sounds. Sebastian looked back at her. And you remember? Evelyn glanced down at the coffee steam rising between them. I remember because I lost everything the moment I ignored my own instincts. Before he could respond, the television mounted above the counter suddenly changed channels. Breaking financial coverage filled the screen. One sentence froze the entire cafe. Hale International stock falls 9% after internal security concerns. Customers turned immediately toward Sebastian. Some whispered. Others pretended not to stare. But Evelyn did not look surprised. She simply reached for the remote, lowered the volume, and calmly continued polishing a coffee cup. Sebastian watched her quietly. You knew this would happen too. Evelyn's voice stayed gentle. No, she finally looked at him directly. I just know storms rarely arrive all at once. They arrive in pieces, one warning at a time. Then she handed him the warm porcelain cup with steady hands while snow continued falling over Manhattan, and the billionaire slowly realized the only person who had never lied to him was the woman everyone else still called just a waitress. The next morning, Manhattan felt colder than the stock market. News vans crowded the sidewalks outside Hale International while reporters spoke urgently into microphones beneath gray winter skies. Investors demanded answers. Analysts predicted collapse. And somewhere between panic and pride, Sebastian Hale found himself walking back toward the only place that still felt honest. Blackwood Cafe glowed softly against the storm outside. Warm light spilled through fogged windows while quiet jazz wrapped around the room like a shield against the noise of the city. Evelyn Carter stood near the espresso machine pouring steamed milk into a porcelain cup with steady hands. Nothing about her movements suggested surprise when Sebastian entered. You did not sleep, she said calmly before he even reached the counter. Sebastian loosened his scarf slightly. Neither did the financial press. That is because fear keeps people awake longer than truth. Daniel arrived moments later carrying 2 phones and visible stress. The board meeting moved to 11. Half the investors want reassurance. The other half want resignations. Sebastian barely reacted. His attention stayed fixed on Evelyn. Can I ask you something? She handed a customer their receipt first before answering. You usually do. Why are you helping me? For the first time in several days, Evelyn looked genuinely caught off guard by the question. She lowered her eyes briefly toward the coffee cup in her hands. I am not helping you. Then what are you doing? She placed the cup onto a tray carefully. I am trying to stop innocent people from suffering because powerful men ignored warning signs again. Daniel slowly leaned against the counter. She really does speak like somebody who survived Wall Street. Evelyn gave a faint smile without humor. London. Sebastian studied her quietly. You still care about the industry? No, she answered softly. I care about the people underneath it. Silence settled between them again. Outside, snow drifted past the windows while strangers hurried through Manhattan, carrying briefcases and worries. Inside the cafe, time seemed slower somehow. Safer. Sebastian finally removed his phone from the table and turned it face down for the first time in years. Evelyn noticed immediately. That must feel uncomfortable. It does. Good. He almost smiled again. Almost. Martha watched the exchange from the register with growing amusement. You know, she whispered toward another waitress. That man used to look like he negotiated with hurricanes. And now he looks like he waits for coffee. Around 10:30, the cafe grew quieter as the morning rush faded. Sebastian remained at the same table near the window while Evelyn cleaned nearby counters in silence. Neither spoke for several minutes. Strangely, it did not feel awkward. It felt rare. Eventually, Sebastian broke the silence himself. What happened after Rothwell? Evelyn's hand slowed slightly against the towel. The board denied everything publicly. Her voice remained calm, but softer now, more distant. Then privately blamed the analysts who warned them. Sebastian listened carefully. Including you. She nodded once. My father invested his retirement savings into one of their protected funds because he trusted the company I worked for. Snowlight reflected faintly across the cafe windows while jazz music drifted overhead. When the collapse happened, Evelyn continued quietly. He lost almost everything in 6 days. Sebastian said nothing. Evelyn folded the towel carefully before speaking again. People think financial disasters are numbers on screens. Her blue eyes lifted toward him slowly. But somewhere underneath every market collapse is a family eating in silence because they do not know what happens next. For the first time since becoming one of the most powerful businessmen in New York, Sebastian Hale felt ashamed of how often he forgot that. His phone buzzed loudly across the table again. Neither of them looked at it immediately. Finally, Daniel checked the screen and stiffened. Sebastian. His tone changed completely. The board just suspended access to your internal servers. Sebastian's expression darkened. What? Somebody inside leadership is moving against you. The cafe suddenly felt very still. Customers continued sipping coffee nearby, without understanding the sentence that had just changed everything. Evelyn looked toward the falling snow outside the windows before speaking softly. The leak was never the real problem. Sebastian stared at her carefully. Then what is? She met his eyes with calm certainty. Somebody inside your company already decided you were easier to remove than protect. The storm outside Manhattan grew heavier by evening. Snow pressed against the cafe windows while wind rattled the glass hard enough to make several customers glance nervously toward the street. Inside Blackwood Cafe, warmth still held the room together through the scent of coffee and the low hum of old jazz records spinning behind the counter. But Sebastian Hale no longer felt calm sitting there. Somebody inside his company was trying to remove him, not compete with him. Remove him. The realization sat heavier than anger. It felt personal. Daniel paced near the window with his phone pressed against his ear while speaking in sharp whispers to legal teams downtown. No, do not send anything through executive servers. Use direct encrypted transfer only. He paused. Because I do not know who has access anymore. Sebastian remained seated at the corner table, staring at the untouched coffee in front of him. For years, he had built Hale International by believing control solved everything. Control of information. Control of timing. Control of people. But Evelyn Carter had quietly exposed the flaw in that belief without ever raising her voice. Control meant nothing if the wrong people were already inside the walls. Evelyn approached slowly, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. You should eat something, she said gently. Sebastian barely looked up. I am not hungry. That usually means the situation is serious. She refilled his cup carefully. Or your ego is injured. Daniel nearly laughed despite the tension. Sebastian exhaled quietly through his nose. You really enjoy saying dangerous things to billionaires. Evelyn placed the coffee pot down calmly. No, her blue eyes lifted toward him. I enjoy saying honest things to people who are not used to hearing them. Silence settled between them again. Outside, headlights blurred through falling snow while pedestrians hurried through the storm with collars raised against the wind. The city looked cold enough to break something. Finally, Sebastian spoke again. What would you do? Evelyn looked confused. About what? If you were me. She leaned lightly against the counter for the first time since he met her. Not casually, just tired. First, I would stop assuming the loudest enemy is the dangerous one. Meaning, the people trying hardest to appear loyal usually are. Daniel lowered his phone slowly. That narrows it down to almost everyone on the executive floor. Evelyn nodded once. Exactly. Sebastian watched her carefully. You already know who it is, do not you? She looked toward the snow outside before answering. No, a pause. But I know the type. The cafe door suddenly opened against the wind. Cold air swept through the room alongside a sharply dressed man in his early 60s wearing a dark cashmere coat and polished shoes dusted with snow. The moment Sebastian saw him, his expression hardened immediately. Arthur. Arthur Mercer smiled smoothly while removing leather gloves. Sebastian, Daniel muttered under his breath. Perfect timing for a nightmare. Arthur Mercer was Hale International's chief financial officer. Calm, intelligent, respected by investors. The kind of executive financial magazines described as stabilizing. He approached the table slowly before noticing Evelyn standing beside the counter. Something unreadable crossed his face for half a second. Recognition. Tiny. Fast. But Evelyn saw it immediately. So did Sebastian. Arthur recovered smoothly. Interesting place for emergency strategy meetings. Sebastian leaned back slightly. I could say the same about surprise visits. Arthur smiled politely. The board is concerned. The board suspended my access before informing me. Temporary precautions. Evelyn quietly stepped away toward another table, but Sebastian noticed something strange. For the first time since meeting her, her movements became more careful around someone. Not afraid. Calculating. Arthur glanced briefly toward her again before lowering his voice toward Sebastian. You should be cautious who you trust right now. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Are you warning me? I am protecting the company. Across the cafe, Evelyn accidentally dropped a spoon into the sink. The sound was small, but Sebastian looked toward her instantly because she never dropped anything. Arthur noticed too. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Calm, silent, familiar. Then Evelyn lowered her gaze and continued washing dishes. Sebastian felt the shift immediately. Something hidden moved beneath the conversation like a current beneath dark water. Arthur stood slowly. The board expects you tomorrow morning at 9. He placed a folded document carefully onto the table. Read page 6 before you defend anyone. Then he turned and disappeared back into the snowstorm outside. Silence followed him. Daniel immediately grabbed the folder. What the hell was that? But Sebastian was no longer looking at the documents. He was watching Evelyn across the cafe. Because for the first time since all of this began, the woman who predicted disasters looked genuinely unsettled. After Arthur Mercer disappeared into the snowstorm, Blackwood Cafe felt strangely smaller. The warm lights still glowed against the windows. Jazz music still drifted softly through the room. Customers still laughed quietly over pastries and coffee. But underneath the ordinary rhythm of the cafe, tension settled like invisible smoke. Sebastian Hale stared toward Evelyn Carter across the counter, while Daniel flipped quickly through the document Arthur had left behind. Page 6, Daniel muttered. What exactly are we supposed to find on page 6? Sebastian barely heard him. His attention remained fixed on Evelyn. She continued drying porcelain cups with calm, measured movements. But something had changed. The confidence she usually carried so effortlessly now looked heavier somehow. Not fear. Recognition. You know him, Sebastian said quietly. Evelyn did not look up immediately. Yes. Daniel lowered the folder slowly. How well? Silence. Snow pressed harder against the windows outside, while headlights blurred through the storm. Finally, Evelyn folded the towel carefully beside the sink. Arthur Mercer worked with Rothwell Capital during the collapse. Sebastian's expression darkened instantly. He never mentioned that. People rarely volunteer information connected to disasters. Daniel turned to page 6 and suddenly froze. Sebastian. His voice dropped sharply. You need to see this. Sebastian took the folder. Inside sat a printed authorization request transferring emergency financial control from the chief executive office directly to the board during periods of instability. Signed approvals already covered most of the page. All except his. Daniel looked stunned. They were preparing to remove you before the leak became public. Sebastian stared silently at the signatures. Men he trusted. Executives he promoted personally. Years of loyalty suddenly looked transactional beneath fluorescent printer ink. Across the room, Evelyn watched his expression carefully. Now you understand, she said softly. Sebastian looked up slowly. Understand what? Power does not disappear during crises. Her blue eyes held steady on his. It simply changes hands faster. The cafe fell quiet again. Even nearby customers seemed to sense the tension now. Martha pretended to reorganize receipts while listening from the register. Daniel rubbed his forehead with visible exhaustion. Okay, somebody explain why Arthur Mercer looked at Evelyn like he had seen a ghost. Sebastian's eyes returned to her immediately. Evelyn remained still for several seconds before answering. Because 5 years ago, I warned Arthur Mercer personally that Rothwell Capital would collapse if they continued hiding the overseas debt exposure. Daniel blinked slowly, and a faint sadness crossed her face. He told me markets reward confidence, not fear. Snowlight reflected softly across the cafe windows, while Sebastian listened in complete silence. 2 months later, Evelyn continued quietly. Thousands of employees lost pensions, retirement funds disappeared, and Arthur Mercer quietly moved to another company before the investigation reached him. Daniel looked horrified. You think he is doing it again? No. Evelyn glanced toward the storm outside. I think he never stopped. Sebastian slowly stood from the table for the first time in nearly an hour. Why did you not tell me immediately? Evelyn finally met his eyes directly. Calm, tired, honest. Because I needed to know whether you wanted truth or simply reassurance. The words hit harder than Sebastian expected. Because for most of his career, reassurance was exactly what powerful people paid for. Analysts softened risks. Executives hid instability. Investors protected confidence above reality. Evelyn Carter was the first person who consistently chose truth even when it isolated her completely. Daniel suddenly looked back toward the folder again. Wait. He pointed sharply toward one signature near the bottom of the page. This timestamp was approved before the leak even happened. Sebastian's expression changed instantly. Cold realization settling beneath controlled anger. Arthur Mercer had not reacted to the crisis. He had prepared for it, which meant the leak was not panic. It was strategy. Evelyn quietly removed Sebastian's empty coffee cup from the table. Some people do not build success, she said softly. They wait beside powerful men until the moment they can inherit it. Sebastian stared toward the snowstorm outside the windows while pieces finally connected inside his mind. Arthur Mercer stayed calm because Arthur Mercer already knew exactly what was happening. Then Evelyn placed a folded white napkin gently beside his hand. There is one more thing you should know. Sebastian unfolded it slowly. Written in neat blue ink were only 7 words. Check the transportation audit from November 3rd. Daniel looked confused immediately. What is that? But Sebastian's expression hardened before either of them finished speaking. Because November 3rd was the exact day Arthur Mercer first recommended accelerating the Tokyo merger. By sunrise, the storm over Manhattan had finally begun to fade. Snow rested quietly along rooftops and sidewalks while pale winter light spilled across the city in soft shades of silver and gold. But inside Hale International, the atmosphere felt colder than ever. Executives moved through the marble hallways with controlled expressions and lowered voices. Security teams stood near elevators pretending not to watch everyone. Fear had fully arrived now. Not loud, not chaotic, calculated. Sebastian Hale walked through the executive floor beside Daniel, carrying the transportation audit Evelyn had pointed him toward the night before. Every page revealed the same pattern. Altered timelines, redirected approvals, missing financial disclosures hidden beneath complex restructuring language. Arthur Mercer had not simply manipulated the merger. He had engineered instability slowly enough that nobody noticed until panic became unavoidable. This is enough to destroy him, Daniel whispered while flipping another page. Sebastian's expression remained unreadable. No, he looked toward the conference room ahead. This is enough to expose him. At exactly 9 o'clock, the board meeting began. 12 executives sat around the polished black table beneath floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Some avoided Sebastian's eyes. Others looked overly calm. Arthur Mercer sat near the center with his hands folded neatly beside a silver pen. Composed, controlled, dangerous. Sebastian, Arthur said smoothly. The board appreciates your attendance despite current complications. Sebastian took his seat without answering immediately. The room felt too warm. Too quiet. You suspended my access before proving misconduct. Arthur gave a small sympathetic smile. Temporary measures protect investor confidence. Daniel placed the audit folder onto the table. Interesting choice of words. Arthur's expression barely changed. Excuse me. Sebastian opened the file slowly. November 3rd. The room became still. That was the day you accelerated the Tokyo merger despite unresolved transportation inconsistencies. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Arthur remained calm. Those projections were approved unanimously, after you removed the original risk analysis. Silence. Sharp and immediate. Arthur leaned back carefully. That is a serious accusation. Sebastian slid several printed pages across the table. These are timestamp discrepancies from internal server logs. Another document followed. And these are deleted audit notes recovered from secondary archives. Arthur's jaw tightened for the first time. Small, barely visible. But Sebastian saw it instantly. So did everyone else in the room. Daniel spoke quietly now. You manufactured instability, leaked internal concerns, then positioned yourself as the stable alternative during investor panic. One board member removed his glasses slowly. Another stopped writing notes altogether. Arthur finally looked toward Sebastian directly. And who exactly uncovered all this? Sebastian thought about the warm cafe, the jazz music, the quiet woman polishing coffee cups while billionaires underestimated her every morning. Someone who still pays attention when powerful people stop listening. Arthur's expression changed almost invisibly, recognition settling beneath irritation. Her. Sebastian did not answer. He no longer needed to. Because Arthur Mercer already understood exactly who stood behind the truth, unraveling his carefully constructed plans. The meeting collapsed into controlled chaos after that. Lawyers entered. Emergency votes followed. Security escorted Arthur quietly from the executive floor before noon, while financial media exploded with breaking updates across every major network. But strangely, Sebastian felt no satisfaction standing inside his office afterward. Only exhaustion. Because Evelyn had been right from the beginning. The real danger had never been markets. It had been arrogance disguised as intelligence. By late afternoon, snowmelt dripped slowly from Manhattan rooftops while the city returned to its restless rhythm. Sebastian arrived at Blackwood Cafe alone again. No assistant. No security detail. Just a man carrying silence heavier than success. Inside, the cafe glowed warmly beneath amber lights while old piano music drifted softly through the room. Evelyn stood near the counter wiping down empty tables after the lunch rush. She looked up as the door closed behind him. It is over, Sebastian said quietly. Evelyn nodded once as if she already knew. Arthur Mercer resigned 32 minutes ago. Sebastian stared at her. You already saw the news? No. She folded the towel carefully beside the sink. But men like him never survive once truth becomes public. He stepped closer slowly. You could have exposed him weeks ago. Yes. Why did you wait? Evelyn looked toward the snow fading outside the windows. Because if I had done it for revenge, she said softly, I would have become exactly like the people who destroyed everything the first time. Sebastian stood there in complete silence while the warm scent of coffee filled the space between them. Then, for the first time since becoming one of the most powerful men in New York, the billionaire lowered his head slightly toward a waitress in quiet respect. Winter passed slowly after the scandal at Hale International. Snow disappeared from the sidewalks of Manhattan, replaced by cold rain, and eventually the soft warmth of early spring sunlight reflecting across the city glass. News networks moved on to newer crises. Investors recovered. Markets stabilized. And for the first time in years, Sebastian Hale stopped measuring success only through numbers rising on screens. Blackwood Cafe remained exactly the same. The old jazz records still played every morning beneath amber lights. Martha still complained softly about tourists ordering complicated drinks. The scent of espresso still drifted through the room before sunrise while the city outside rushed endlessly toward somewhere important. And every morning at exactly 7:10 a.m. Sebastian walked through the revolving door, carrying less noise inside him than before. Not because his life became easier, because something inside him became quieter. Evelyn Carter still worked behind the counter in her black uniform with the same calm grace that once made people overlook her entirely. But now, something subtle had changed inside the cafe. Customers listened when she spoke. The younger staff watched her with admiration instead of confusion. Even the regular executives who once ignored her now thanked her sincerely before leaving. Respect had arrived slowly, quietly, exactly the way she would have wanted it. One rainy Thursday morning, Sebastian entered carrying a thin envelope beneath his coat. He placed it gently on the counter beside her. Evelyn glanced down at it. What is this? An offer? She looked mildly amused. I thought billionaires preferred contracts. Not this time. The rain tapped softly against the windows while jazz music drifted low through the nearly empty cafe. Evelyn opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a simple document offering her a senior advisory position at Hale International with complete strategic autonomy and enough compensation to change almost anyone's life forever. She stared at the page for several quiet seconds before looking back up at him. You rebuilt the entire advisory division. Sebastian nodded once. I removed everyone who confused confidence with competence. A faint smile touched her lips. That must have emptied several floors. He almost laughed. Almost. Then his expression softened again. You were right about something else, too. Evelyn folded the document carefully. Only one thing. Sebastian looked around the cafe slowly. The warm lights. The ordinary conversations. The little details he used to dismiss as unimportant. Powerful people stop listening after success. His eyes returned to hers. I did too. Silence settled gently between them. Comfortable now. Honest. Evelyn finally slid the envelope back across the counter. I am not coming back to finance. Sebastian did not look disappointed. Somehow, he already knew the answer before asking. Why? She glanced toward the window where rain blurred Manhattan into silver reflections. Because I spent years trying to predict disasters for people who only cared about profits. Then she looked around the cafe quietly. Here, when someone is hurting, you can actually see it. Sebastian lowered his eyes briefly toward the untouched coffee between them. For the first time in his life, he understood that some people became extraordinary not because they chased power, but because they refused to let power change who they were. Martha called Evelyn softly from the kitchen. Another order ready. Another customer waiting. Ordinary things. Real things. Evelyn tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear before reaching for the coffee pot again. You know, Sebastian said quietly, most people in my world still think they won because Arthur Mercer lost. Evelyn paused briefly. And what do you think? He watched her for a long moment before answering. I think I met the first person who could have destroyed everyone in the room. A small silence followed. Warm and human. Then Sebastian smiled faintly and chose kindness instead. Evelyn looked down at the coffee she was pouring, almost embarrassed by the compliment. Outside, rain continued falling softly across Manhattan, while people hurried through another ordinary day without realizing the quietest woman in the cafe had once carried enough intelligence to shake entire financial markets. But maybe that was the point. Real power did not need applause. It did not need headlines or fear or rooms full of people pretending to admire it. Sometimes real power looked like a woman serving coffee in silence while choosing dignity every single day. And somehow, that made her unforgettable. If this story stayed with you, maybe it is because all of us have met someone the world underestimated. Someone quiet, someone kind, someone stronger than they ever needed to prove. And if you believe those people deserve to be seen too, then stay a little longer with stories like this.